The church bells tolled 12 times, low, slow, and mournful. Hans Wilsdorf stood quietly at the edge of the procession, his tiny black shoes swallowed by the mud. The townsfolk of Kulmbach watched solemnly as the boy with hollowed eyes walked beside a coffin too heavy for his age. His fingers were clenched, not in anger, but in confusion. How does one grieve properly when their entire world disappears before they understand why? At just 12 years old, Hans was now an orphan. His father, a successful hardware merchant, had died suddenly the year before. His mother had followed soon after, claimed by fever and grief. With their passing, the warmth, laughter, and life inside the Wilsdorf household evaporated, replaced only by the ticking of clocks and the silence of memories. After the funeral, the family house was shuttered and locked, a mausoleum of better days. With no close relatives willing to raise him, Hans was sent to a strict boarding school in Coburg. The walls were cold, the beds were colder. Emotions were buried beneath routine, and letters from home, if they came, were treasured like relics. But Hans was different. He spoke little, not out of shyness, but preference. He watched, he listened, and above all, he learned. Where most boys played, Hans found comfort in books and mathematics. But what captivated him most were the tiny machines that measured time. One day, while helping clean out the school's storeroom, Hans stumbled upon a broken pocket watch. Most boys would have ignored it. Hans picked it up with reverence. That night, under the flickering light of a gas lamp, Hans opened the timepiece. He couldn't fix it, not yet. But something about the delicate gears, the intricate springs, the balance wheel, it mesmerized him. Time never lied. Time never left. Time was all he had. By the age of 15, the modest inheritance left by Hans's parents had dwindled. The school could no longer keep him. But fate had other plans. A distant relative and former business associate of Hans' father, Herr Meyer, heard of the boy's plight. Living in Geneva, Switzerland, the heart of the watchmaking world, he wrote a letter. "Send the boy here. I know a man in need of an apprentice. Perhaps watches will be of use to him." Hans arrived in Geneva with a small suitcase and a mind brimming with questions. He was introduced to Monsieur Kuhn, a respected exporter of Swiss timepieces. At first, Hans did menial work, sweeping floors, preparing tea, organizing tools. But his eyes never rested. He observed the skilled technicians, memorizing their every movement. He took mental notes, scribbled diagrams in a leather-bound notebook, and quietly disassembled broken watches in his spare time. One evening, Monsieur Kuhn caught him after hours, bent over a dissected wristwatch. "You were told not to touch those," Kuhn said sharply. Hans looked up, unafraid. "I just wanted to understand the balance wheel." Kuhn raised an eyebrow. "And do you?" Hans nodded. "It regulates the gear train. If it's even slightly off, the entire mechanism loses accuracy." Kuhn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You may not be just a servant after all." From that day on, Hans was named apprentice. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, from technical mastery to the fine balance of business and craftsmanship. By the age of 22, Hans spoke German, French, and English fluently. He understood mechanics and marketing, but more importantly, he carried a vision. In 1903, Hans moved to London. The city pulsed with opportunity. Carriages clattered on cobblestones, ships unloaded goods from across the empire, and shop windows glittered with imported luxuries. To Hans, the future belonged not to bulky pocket watches, but to wristwatches, compact, elegant, and precise. At the time, wristwatches were seen as fragile and feminine, but Hans believed otherwise. He partnered with his English brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, and together they formed a company, Wilsdorf and Davis. Their early business model was simple: import high-quality Swiss movements and place them into English-made watch cases. They sold them under various brand names, gaining a reputation for reliability. But Hans wanted more than business success. He wanted a brand that symbolized excellence. He began searching for a name, short, strong, elegant. One morning, while riding a horse-drawn omnibus, the word came to him as if whispered by fate. Rolex, it was perfect. In 1908, Wilsdorf registered the name Rolex. He believed it was easy to pronounce in any language and short enough to fit neatly on a watch face. From the start, Hans emphasized accuracy. At a time when many watches were mere ornaments, he submitted Rolex movements to official observatories for testing, institutions that judged timekeeping precision. In 1910, a Rolex watch became the first wristwatch in the world to receive the Swiss Certificate of Chronometric Precision. In 1914, another Rolex earned a Class A certificate from the Kew Observatory in England, the highest honor, usually reserved for marine chronometers. Suddenly, the world took notice. Wristwatches were no longer just fashionable. They were dependable. But Hans wasn't done. In 1915, during the height of World War I, anti-German sentiment surged in England. To protect the company, Hans changed the name from Wilsdorf and Davis to the Rolex Watch Company. Then came heartbreak. His beloved wife, Florence, died of a sudden illness. The woman who had supported his vision from the beginning was gone. Hans was devastated but not defeated. He channeled his grief into purpose. He moved the headquarters to Geneva and focused on making Rolex a symbol of endurance. He began developing waterproof watches, resistant to dust and moisture, something never achieved reliably before. In 1926, Rolex launched the Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch. A year later, it gained global fame when English swimmer Mercedes Gleitze wore it during her swim across the English Channel. The watch survived the journey. So did Hans's dream. Innovation continued. Rolex created the self-winding perpetual movement in 1931, revolutionizing how wristwatches worked. No more winding, just wear it. And it powered itself. By mid-century, Rolex became the timekeeper for explorers, pilots, deep-sea divers, and world leaders. The explorer climbed Everest. The submariner plunged into the ocean. The day-date adorned the wrists of presidents. But Hans Wilsdorf never forgot his beginnings. In 1945, he established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, ensuring that Rolex profits would fund education, science, and charities long after he was gone. He believed wealth should serve society. He died in 1960, leaving behind no children, but an immortal legacy. He had no parents, no inheritance, no home, but he had time. Time which he studied. Time which he respected. Time which he mastered. And with it, Hans Wilsdorf, an orphan boy from Kulmbach, created not just a brand, but a timeless symbol of excellence, endurance, and innovation. Rolex, born from grief, driven by vision, and powered by every second